Hello everyone, we're on chapter 9 and we are on paragraph 14. The highest level of individual life is that of conceptual thinking without regard to any definite perceptual content. We determine the content of a concept through pure intuition from out of the ideal sphere. Such a concept contains at first no reference to any definite percepts. If we enter upon an act of will under the influence of a concept which refers to a percept, that is, under the influence of a mental picture, then it is this percept which determines our action indirectly by way of the conceptual thinking. But if we act under the influence of intuitions, the driving force of our action is pure thinking. As it is the custom in philosophy to call the faculty of pure thinking reason, we may well be justified in giving the name of practical reason to the moral driving force characteristic of this level of life. The dearest account of this driving force in the will has been given by Crayon. In my opinion, his article on this subject is one of the most important contributions to present-day philosophy, more especially to ethics. Crayon calls the driving force we are here discussing the practical a priori, that is, an impulse to action issuing directly from my intuition. And 14 is summarized as follows. The highest level of individual life is that of conceptual thinking that does not relate to a percept, that is, intuitions. We determine the content through pure intuition from the ideal sphere. This type of driving force is called pure thinking. A mental picture, as we mentioned before, relates to a percept that already exists. And so what Steiner here is talking about is the individual life known as pure thinking, and it has no basis in any sort of perception or whatnot. And so that is what can drive somebody, and it's one's intuition, and that is basically the last of the elements of it's the last type of driving force. So there's 4 of them, and I'll just quickly review that. The first one is instinct, which he talks about in paragraph 11. 12 is feeling. The third is mental pictures, and the fourth is pure thinking, which is intuition. So intuition and pure thinking is the 4th level. My point, he doesn't point this out, Steiner, but I believe in our practical life there may be more than one of these types of elements that affect our driving force that we're not conscious of. He doesn't come out and say it, but I mean, I think that, somebody could have a driving force that consists of feeling and instinct or whatnot. So I don't believe he doesn't point this out at all, but I do believe this is probably true, that they don't just operate purely. You're not purely operating from just feeling as a driving force. He doesn't, as I said before, he doesn't talk about it, but I mean, I think that's something that he probably could have written out, but he probably didn't think about it or whatnot. So that's also unless he talks about it later on and I don't recall it, but that's what he's talking about in this paragraph. Is basically the last level is in the life of intuitions and pure thinking as something that could be a driving force. So I'm going to move on to 15. It is clear that such an impulse can no longer be counted in the strictest sense as belonging to the character-logical disposition. For what is here effective as the driving force is no longer something merely individual in me, but the ideal and hence universal content of my intuition. As soon as I see the justification for taking this content as the basis and starting point of an action, I enter upon the act of will, irrespective of whether I have had the concept beforehand, or whether it only enters my consciousness immediately before the action. that is, irrespective of whether it was already present as a disposition in me or not. And 15 is summarized as follows. This type of impulse, that is, pure thinking, intuition, is no longer dependent on my characterological disposition. This impulse is no longer merely individual. This impulse is merely no longer individual, but the ideal and universal content of my intuition. Intuitions lead to an act of will that may or may not have been present in one's characterological disposition. So basically, this paragraph, he's pointing out that the last type of level, that of pure intuition, that is no longer individual. That is something that is universal and ideal. And the other three, which is instinct, feeling, and mental pictures, those are all very subjective experiences. Those are very personal. Those are very individual. And so he's pointing out that even as a type of driving force, that of pure intuition and pure thinking is already on a different level than these other three that we've talked about. And that is what he is pointing out as well in this. And he's pointing out that this type of impulse isn't dependent on our personality, which he calls our characterological disposition. So already you can see this unconscious drive within us of intuitions has this great potential for freedom, because it's not we may perform an act that may not necessarily be based on our personality, because what's freedom, I think, involves being able to do an act regardless of what is in your makeup, your individual makeup, to do what needs to be done for the given circumstance, and not to be limited by your fears or whatnot. And so he doesn't come out and say it in this paragraph, but that's what I see going on, that the intuitions can lead to freedom, because it's not necessarily based on they're an act that can result, that isn't dependent upon our characterological disposition. And so that's sort of the main point in 15. And I'm just going to finish up with 16. Since a real act of will results only when a momentary impulse to action in the form of a concept or mental picture acts on the characterological disposition, such an impulse then becomes the motive of will. And 16 is summarized as follows. An impulse becomes the motive of will when it appears in the form of a mental picture or concept and acts on the characterological disposition. So basically, for Steiner, he believes an act of will either issues from a mental picture that you have or a concept that you have. And again, intuition can leads to a concept, or your mental picture is a separate thing from a concept. But that's basically what he's saying. And so any true act of will is either a mental picture or a concept, and concept again comes from our intuition. So that's basically all we're going to cover for today, and have a good day.